Hi, this is Mac from Mac's List. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about my new book, Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. I've been helping job seekers find meaningful, well-paying work since 2001, and now I put all my best advice into one easy-to-use guide. My book shows you how to make your resume stand out in a stack of applications, where you can find the hidden jobs that never get posted, and what you need to do to ace your next job interview. Get the first chapter now for free. Visit maxlist.org/anywhere. This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ben Forstag and Jessica Black from the Mac's List team. This week, we're talking about how to sync your resume and your LinkedIn page. When you look for your next job, you need both a resume and a LinkedIn profile, and they need to complement each other. Our guest expert this week is Ed Hahn. He says you need to be consistent when talking about yourself online and in your resume. Later in the show, Ed and I talk about how to sync up both your LinkedIn profile and your resume. The words you choose to use on your resume can help or hurt you in any application review. Ben Forstag has found a list of 100 words that are great for your resume and 5 words you'll want to avoid. Ben tells us more in a moment. You're an expert in one subject, but your professional experience is in another field. How do you talk about this on your LinkedIn profile? That's our question of the week, and Jessica Black offers her advice in a moment. Well, as always, let's check in with the Mac's List team. And this week, we're returning to a favorite topic here at Mac's List. That's LinkedIn. It's a subject that you can talk about from so many different angles. And this is a question, our theme this week, that comes up a lot. How should my LinkedIn page be different from my resume? Jessica, Ben, I'm curious, what do you two do differently on your LinkedIn profile versus your resume?
So the big one for me is in my resume, I write in the third person because that's much more of a formal document, whereas in LinkedIn, I try to stay in the first person because it's a social networking tool, and the whole idea is to make connections with other people on the platform, and I think the first person is just a whole lot more communicative and social and friendly.
Yeah, how about you, Jessica?
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also really appreciate LinkedIn for its storytelling capacity of being able to make it a little, still keeping it professional, but being able to sort of tie in a little bit more of the reasons why you do the things that you do, whereas, your resume is just the hard facts of what you've done and where you've been.
Yeah, there's an informality, or at least a different tone that comes on LinkedIn that you don't have on your resume, and that opportunity to tell stories as well. I like that a lot too, Jessica. One difference that stands out for me is just the length. There's a long-standing or running debate here on the podcast about the length of a resume. Should it be 1 page or 2? And we can go back and forth on that, but the great thing about LinkedIn is there are no limits. There's
no restrictions. Yeah, it's really nice. You can go all the way back as far as you want to and add as many sort of bullet points and accomplishments and all of those things, and then add extra things of, linking. We've talked about this before on the podcast of linking projects and linking documents and videos and all the sort of visual components of your accomplishments as well, which is kind of nice. And then the recommendations and the endorsements and all of those extra components as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to tell your story and share your accomplishments. And I know Ed will make this point later in the interview, that you do need to think strategically about how what you do on LinkedIn matches up with your resume and how they support each other.
Of course, yeah. You definitely want to be careful to not have any glaring differences between, especially timelines or, stating accomplishments that aren't on your resume or vice versa. That's important. I'm excited to hear what he says about that.
Yeah, I am too. Well, let's turn first, though, to Ben, who is out there every week poking around the internet looking for resources you can use in your job search and your career. Now, Ben, what have you uncovered for our listeners this week?
This week, I want to share a resource I actually found on LinkedIn. This came from their Pulse publishing platform. It's by a LinkedIn member named Mike. I'm going to butcher this last name. Mike Figliolo, who runs a leadership communications and strategic consulting firm in Columbus, Ohio. And it's called 101 Great Words to Use in Your Resume and 5 to Avoid. And I will include the URL to this in the show notes. So really astute and longtime listeners of the podcast may remember that I shared a similar list of this way back in episode 38 with Susan Rich. I think there's never a shortage of good words you can use in your resume, and certainly words that you could get rid of. The reason I like this particular list and decided to share it in addition to the one I shared earlier was a few reasons. First, I think Mike has a really good intuitive test for figuring out whether you need new words in your resume, and he calls it the develop test. It's really simple. He says, open up your resume, do a search for the word develop or any variation of develop, development, developed, developing, developer. And if it's in there more than 5 times, you need to get rid of it at least 4 times. He says this is one of the most overused words in resumes, and it reads as very redundant and boring. So if you got the word developed in there a whole bunch, you need to edit your resume. The third thing I really like about this list is that he includes 5 words that are resume killers. These are words that are way overused, that are not appropriate for a resume, and that you want to take out at all costs. Can you guess what the first one is, Mac?
Developed.
Bingo, you got it.
Okay.
How did you ever know?
I think I had some coaching here at the start of the segment.
I'll tell you the other 4 here. They're leveraged, synergized, optimized, and annihilated. Now, I've used 3 of the 4 of those in the past when talking about myself in like cover letters or things like that. I can't think of a single reason you would ever use the word annihilated, though, in any capacity in a resume or cover letter.
That's very aggressive.
It is.
And also synergized is a really clunky word. Like synergy is a real word, but synergized seems like it sounds made up.
It's one of those like business cliched things. Like
Yeah.
we want to synergize all of our core capacities.
It sounds like you're trying to mix 2 words together and it doesn't sound good.
Yeah, it ranks up there for me along with initiated.
Oh, yeah.
That's just a space-filling word.
So another good list here. I will share the LinkedIn URL in the show notes. And I hope that none of you annihilate any of your job responsibilities this week.
Yeah. Okay. I do want to see annihilated used in context. And does he give an example in
Like annihilating a budget or like costs or something. I could see that.
Yeah, I'm intrigued because I agree. It's with you, Jessica. It's a very aggressive,
Really
word
aggressive.
for a resume.
After successfully completing the Death Star under budget and on time, we annihilated.
Princess Leia's home planet.
Correct.
Right. So you structurally, there's a claiming an accomplishment there. It's pretty clear that something got done because of your work. So good theory, but maybe not something you'd take pride in.
Yeah. Very niche wording there.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you for the Star Wars reference. And if you've got a idea for Ben or just want to share your favorite Star Wars story, please address him via email. It's ben@maxlist.org.
You don't know what you've done, Mac. My inbox is going to be full of Chewbacca stories and Ewoks and all those things.
We've unleashed the power of the Force. So I think that's a good thing. Well, speaking of forces, let's turn to you, our listeners, and to Jessica Black, who is here to answer one of your questions. Jessica, what's in the mailbag this week?
Yeah, we have a really interesting question this week, and I'm going to let everyone listen to that before I weigh in.
My question has to do with my dual career, especially with respect to LinkedIn. I am both a United States Coast Guard licensed master and I am a knowledgeable expert in the world of foreign trade. Those are not mutually exclusive. However, they definitely go on two distinct paths. And so my question is, how do I pursue a dual career, both professionally and on LinkedIn?
This is a really interesting question because I think that a lot of people struggle with this, of having this idea of having dual careers or having experience in a couple different areas and not really knowing which one to run with. And you don't want to ignore one side and you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one other one because you have, equal experience in both sides. And so what I really like about being able to use LinkedIn in this capacity is finding the threads of where they are common or similar, and being able to weave them together. And what skills do you use in both of your past careers and whatnot that you could leverage to bring into your next opportunity. So I would try to find that, and I don't have specific examples because I'm not exactly sure what a Coast Guard licensed master, what kind of experiences you've had there. So I would love to be able to see concrete experiences and be able to help with that a little bit more. But what else do you guys think?
So I think this is a common challenge that a lot of people have. And I know if you listen to this show, one of the things we always say is like the most important thing is to get focused with your job search, like where you want to go. And I think some people think that means you need to like get down to like one very narrow niche topic. The truth is you can have multiple goals. You could have 2 or 3. You just need to narrow it down from the 15 or 20 different goals. And so I think you could basically pursue a job search on 2 different tracks, where one is focused around the frankly, I don't know exactly what a Coast Guard master does either, but one is focused around that track and the other one is focused around an international trade track. And it may well be that there are places where these 2 different career trajectories intersect. And that might be the sweet spot that you find, where if there's a position that perfectly aligns with both those skills, that's like your dream job right there.
Yeah.
And this is a very timely question for today's interview with Ed, because I know he is a big fan of what he calls master resumes. And one of his ideas that he'll share with us is you need a master resume that describes your career, but it has to be it's a starting point for tweaking your resume to help you pursue the different goals that you were talking about, Jessica. So if you do want to, in this case, pursue a career in the Coast Guard or something in foreign trade, if you have a strong resume, a good base, you can make those adjustments fairly easily. And I agree with you, Ben. Most people, I think they struggle with getting that list of career goals from 15 to 3 or 4 or even just 2. But it's very common to have explore several different goals at the same time. And Ed will not only talk about resumes, but he'll talk about how you can build out your LinkedIn profile to support that as well. So great question.
Yeah, really interesting.
Okay. Well, if you have a question for us, please email Jessica. Her email address is jessica@maxlist.org, or call her listener line. That number is area code 716-JOB TALK. That's 716-562-8255. And if we use your question on the show, we'll send you a copy of Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. We'll be back in a moment, and when we return, I'll talk with this week's guest expert about how to sync your LinkedIn page and your resume. Most people struggle with job hunting. The reason is simple. Most of us learn the nuts and bolts of looking for work by trial and error. That's why I produce this podcast, to help you master the skills you need to find a great job. It's also why I wrote my new book, Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. For 15 years at MaxList, I've helped people in Portland, Oregon find meaningful, well-paying, and rewarding jobs that they love. Now, I put all of my job hunting secrets in one book that can help you no matter where you live. You'll learn how to get clear about your career goals, find hidden jobs that never get posted, and ace your next job interview. For more information and to download the first chapter for free, visit maxlist.org/anywhere. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Ed Hahn. Ed Hahn is a recruiter with a passion for networking and helping people put their professional best foot forward, especially on LinkedIn. His own career includes stints with a major Wall Street firm, an international fashion brand, and a publishing company. He joins us today from Flemington, New Jersey. Ed, thanks for coming on the show.
Mac, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, it's terrific to have you. Now, our topic, as you know, Ed, is LinkedIn and resumes, syncing them up.
Sure.
And we get this one a lot. I bet you do too. Sometimes people just want to copy and paste their resume and write into their LinkedIn page. But we want to obviously see people use both tools effectively. So let's start with the basics. Why shouldn't somebody just copy and paste a resume into their LinkedIn profile?
I love that question, Mac, and it's an important one that more people should ask, I think. So the reason why is that a LinkedIn profile, by dint of its very nature, is a very broad overview of what your professional value proposition is, as the expression goes, right? So, for example, if you're a project manager, right? So you manage projects. People understand what that means. People understand, there's IT project managers, there's construction project managers, right? And within these very broad headings, people typically understand what those things are. And this is what's seen by everybody with an internet connection who wants to look at your profile, assuming you haven't, changed the privacy settings to prevent that. Now, it's a one-size-fits-all solution. But as we all know, one-size-fits-all is really not the solution when you're talking about a particular opportunity and a particular job seeker's qualifications for it, right? So I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with the best practice of customizing the resume for opportunities. For example, if the job description speaks of certain very specific experience, let's say we're talking about an administrative assistant, for example, who needs to have strong experience in booking international travel, let's say.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I do want, Ed, I think some people wonder, do they need to customize their resume for every job application? And what I'm hearing you say is that that's a no-brainer these days. That the answer is absolutely yes.
Yes, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a no-brainer, but I certainly do think it's a best practice, Mac, because there's usually very specific language involved in most job descriptions. And part of being able to demonstrate that you are a fit for the opportunity and with that culture for the hiring entity is being able to sound like, yes, I am that kind of person. For example, let's say that this is a management consultancy. So in a management consultancy, you expect a lot of the colleagues to be using MBA speak, right? Like that little rhetorical trick I just did, where I say, make a statement and then comma, right, question mark. So there's typically very specific language that ideally the job seeker wants to mirror to demonstrate, yes, I am the kind of person that you want to add to your team. Don't I sound like you?
Okay. So when you're building that resume out, pay attention to the job description, mirror the language back. Let's go back to LinkedIn. You were you made the point that it is probably the widest seen document that describes your professional background. It's and you say one size. You have to construct something that can appeal to the broadest audience possible. When you're building your LinkedIn page, Ed, how do you, while you don't want to copy and paste your resume right into the profile, how can you use your resume as a starting point?
Well, obviously, and let's assume for the sake of argument, we're speaking strictly of a chronological format resume, right? Versus the functional or the hybrid resume format.
That sounds good.
because obviously that's the closest thing we're going to get to an apples to apples comparison, right? So when you have that so with that understanding, certainly the structure of here's my work experience, etc. That's very straightforward, and LinkedIn does really ape the chronological resume format, what with the name, summary, and then the experience, and then the educational information towards the end. And of course, that's a little bit frustrating right now because with the new interface, you can't rearrange those things with the freedom that we previously had, right? But certainly, you could take the broad headings anyway, right? And certainly that would make a lot of sense.
So we were talking, Ed, about using a chronological resume and as a starting point for building your LinkedIn page, and you were saying that it can help you as you build out that LinkedIn page. Are there things that you shouldn't do when drawing on content from your resume for your LinkedIn profile?
I definitely do think there are certain things that should be avoided, again, as a best practice. So the things that I would recommend doing are, number one, please don't simply copy and paste the experience from each position that was held. There's a couple of reasons for that. Typically speaking, most job titles, the day-to-day functions are fairly straightforward. Most people understand what those things are going to be, right? But in the resume, that's where you really want your accomplishments to be. And I don't think that's the kind of thing that most job seekers want to add on their LinkedIn profiles. It's very easy to find, very specific keywords in a LinkedIn profile, and heaven knows that's what I do every day, all day. But the actual resume itself, that's where you really want the accomplishments to stand out. So your CAR, PAR, or whatever abbreviation you like for the behavioral interview format response, that certainly would be something I would reserve for a resume.
Okay, that's interesting. I want to just explore for a moment. Do you think it's not a good idea to list your accomplishments on LinkedIn, or are you saying that people should just take a different approach?
I think it's better not to include all of the accomplishments on LinkedIn. And the reason for my saying that is what will happen is that perhaps you've listed your accomplishments, right? But then because you've listed accomplishments, someone who is looking at the resume might have you in mind for a different role, may not necessarily see the accomplishments he or she is particularly keen on seeing. And then you have the problem of, again, one size fits all. Then you come to a place where you almost kind of want to list all of your accomplishments. And then once you've done that, you've given them no reason to contact you.
So, Ed, what's your best advice about when describing your experience on LinkedIn to give a reader that reason to contact you? How can people stand out and incent somebody after they read your page to say, oh, gosh, I want to talk to that person?
Sure. Mac, and I'm really glad that you asked that as well. So certainly, you want your LinkedIn profile certainly to be very keyword and SEO compliant, right? And certainly job seekers have a pretty good idea of what kinds of keywords should apply for the kinds of roles they're targeting. Developers certainly understand these things. So certainly anyone who works in digital media would know that really well. But if someone is uncertain what terms would really apply, they should certainly do a survey of the kinds of job descriptions that they're seeing that interest them, and make sure they're identifying commonalities in the keywords that are being sought in those job descriptions.
Great. Now, Ed, I know you're a big fan of master resumes. Can you tell our listeners what a master resume is and how it can help you when you're not only building out applications that require a resume, but also constructing your LinkedIn page?
Of course, happy to do that. So I'm a huge fan of the master resume, and let me be clear about what I mean when I say master resume. What I mean by that is the full work and educational experience that a job seeker has earned. So even though perhaps you're going back to your very first job, after leaving school, then yes, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And in addition to that, I am talking about a master list of the accomplishments that a job seeker has achieved as well. And I think this is extremely important, Mac. So I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with the accomplishments that could appear on as bullets for each entry in a resume. And the reason I'm big on the master list of accomplishments is because of two things. Number one, having that list handy, it makes it a lot easier to customize resumes on the fly. So you can speak to, the persistence. You can speak to work ethic. You can speak to thinking outside the box and all these other kinds of traits that job descriptions tend to emphasize. And that makes it a lot easier to do these things. But here's the other thing, right? As anyone who's been through a job search knows, sometimes your job search day has not gone well, and you need to recharge a little bit. Perhaps maybe you've had a discouraging day, and certainly having managed my own searches in the past, I know I certainly did. But the beauty of the master list of accomplishments is that you can pull it out when you're having such a day and remind yourself of the amazing things that you have done in your career.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Ed. And I love your recommendation that you're creating a sort of a fundamental reference document here. You're recording all your accomplishments from the start of your career and keeping it up to date and
Right.
using it as a starting point for the individual resumes you might create, or at least the ones that you might tweak. How can people use that document when they're building out their LinkedIn page? What do you see your clients do effectively when they do that?
So, going back to what we were discussing earlier, I'm not a huge fan of sharing the accomplishments on a LinkedIn profile, but when you can do it, I mean, usually people have have a short list of accomplishments of which they're most proud. And certainly, certainly one of those would be a terrific branding statement. If you can work that into your summary statement in a LinkedIn profile, certainly that would garner a lot of attention. That would make a lot of people sit up and pay attention, right? So, for example, let's say that you are a project manager and your claim to fame is that none of your projects has ever been over budget or over schedule. I mean, that's an extraordinary accomplishment to be able to say for a project manager.
Yeah, that is very impressive. And how do you recommend people put that into their LinkedIn profile?
So I recommend including that in the summary. Typically, there are ways if you can state it concisely, you can also make that part of your headline, certainly. And that certainly the headline is, I think, a highly underutilized piece of screen real estate.
It is, and I'm always attracted by compelling headlines when I run across them. And headline writing is an art. It's one you can master, but the people who do it well certainly do stand out.
That's really quite my sense as well, Mac.
Yeah. Well, terrific, Ed. I've enjoyed the conversation very much. Tell us what's coming up next for you.
So coming up next for me. So back in October, I began a job search and support group. There's an area in Warren, New Jersey, which is currently being underserved, and yet there are a lot of job seekers out there, and that I saw an opportunity and need, and thought that someone should fill it. So why not me? So the group is called Land Faster. You can find us on Facebook easily enough. We meet in Warren, New Jersey, one evening, the second Thursday evening each month.
Well, terrific. We'll include a link to that Facebook group in the show notes. And I know also people, Ed, not surprisingly, can find you on LinkedIn. And your LinkedIn URL is linkedin.com/Ed M. Hahn. So, Ed, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure, Mac. Thanks for having me.
Back in the MaxList studio with Jessica and Ben. What are your thoughts about my conversation with Ed about resumes and LinkedIn pages and how they sync up?
Yeah, it was it was interesting to hear what he mentioned about the making sure that you're adaptable and, the customizable resume that's crucial to everyone. And I really liked his master list, his couple of pieces about that, of especially, and you touched upon this during the interview, Mac, of I like the idea of making that list of all the accomplishments, because I think it does really help so that you're not having to rack your brain every time you're writing a cover letter or, getting ready to interview, that you sort of just, you've done the work already and it's there, and you can use that content later.
Yeah, I know on an earlier interview with Michelle Ward, she talked about the value of keeping track of your accomplishments during the course of a year so that they're handy when you sit down with a supervisor to talk about a raise or what you've accomplished. And Ed's point here that you need a list like that, what he called a master resume for your entire career that lists all of your accomplishments, I think is even more powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like all that stuff about the master resume. I think that's one of these simple things that we all should be doing, but very few people actually do, because we don't think about a job search until we're looking for a job. The one thing that I am still trying to wrap my mind around, I'll admit, is the don't talk about your accomplishments on LinkedIn. And I'm curious about your opinion on this, because, I think one of the real functions of LinkedIn is to get people's attention. And one of the ways to do that is by highlighting as many accomplishments as possible. So what was your reaction to that, Mac?
I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, I was intrigued by that. I think it's a novel approach. And I know that Ed has written about this, and there has a blog post or two that we should link to in the show notes so people can explore it more themselves. I think his main point is that these are two different mediums, LinkedIn and resumes, and you have the opportunity on LinkedIn to talk about a lot of different subjects, and you should take advantage of that. And then with the limited real estate you have on a resume, if you have to pick one or two things to focus on, probably accomplishments, I think Ed would say, are what matters. Well, thank you both, and thank you, Ed, for joining us, and thank you to our listeners for downloading this week's episode of Find Your Dream Job. If you like what you hear, please sign up for our free weekly newsletter. In every issue, we give you the key points of that week's show. We also include links to all the resources mentioned, and you get a transcript of the full episode. Subscribe to the newsletter now, and we'll send you our job seeker checklist. In one easy-to-use file, we show you all the steps you need to take to find a great job. Get your free newsletter and checklist today. Go to maxlist.org/podcast. And join us next Wednesday when our special guest will be Joseph Liu. He'll talk about the right way to resign from your job. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.